I have a very deep connection to ISI and to National Review that I'd like to tell you about, and it would be unknown to any of you, in the case certainly of National Review. The ISI is newer. The first article that I ever had published was published by William Buckley in National Review. I'll bet you didn't know that. You did know it?
I did not know that.
No, there would be no way you would. I was 21 years old, and I contacted William Buckley, and it gives you, it's by the way, 100% to his credit that he published me. I was an unknown, completely unknown, but he so wanted to give young people a start. It was to his credit. My article, incidentally, was awful. No, I'm not happy to say this, but I could prove it to you, because this is what it was. My field of study, I was at the time at Columbia, and I was at the Russian and Middle East Institutes of the School of International Affairs. So my chief area of study was communist countries, communism, Russian, and so on. So I was taking another trip to Eastern Europe, and that's how I contacted him. I mean, how many conservatives are going to Poland, East Germany, and Romania, and so on? So he said, sure, write it. So what is it on? I said, well, I was in Poland, and I'd like to write, Will Gierek Survive? Now, none of you probably remember Gierek. There's no reason you would. He was the Polish communist leader for about 10 years, even more than 10 years. This was 1970. And I wrote the article, Will Gierek Survive? He did, another 10 years. So in effect, I was right, because I predicted his downfall. So that's why I really do believe it is the most embarrassing piece that I ever wrote. And God bless William Buckley, whom I then had a chance. I brought him out to California. I was in my 20s, the head of an educational institute there. And I have to tell you, I measure more than anything else. This is very autobiographical. I could spend the whole talk on this, but it's not what you invited me to speak on. Since I was a child, I have felt, and I am certain of this, brains are wildly overrated in their significance. Wildly. And in fact, I don't even find brilliant people interesting unless they're good. There are people who find brilliant bad people interesting. I don't. Goodness interests me more than brains. And it was always the case. Obviously, everyone knows how brilliant Buckley was. But I picked up immediately what a decent, truly decent man he was, and that's what fascinated me. I spent a day with him, and a day I will never forget. And the way he treated me, much younger than he, and no big deal. But it was something I'll never forget. He was an extraordinary human being. So I have very wonderful long ties, and I've been now as well, each week my column is published among other places at National Review, and I love being published there because of the number of readers, the quality of the readers, and the beautiful work that they put into every single piece. It's a real credit. The editing, which thank God is not too severe, because I go through Alan Estrin, whom you've met, and my wife, who do the severe editing in advance. But also the beautiful art and photo work. It's a terrific page. And it's great to be affiliated. Great to see you, Jonah, and to be speaking in front of you and all of you who are here from National Review. And as regards ISI, well, I've come to know you better and better, promoting ISI on my show, which was great for you, which made me very happy because you do such great work. And I'll just give you a little example of something that you do that's so good and that I had a little role in. And that was a book that was just published, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise. Now, that's not bestsellerdom oriented, because Andalusian is not an everyday term for most people, even National Review readers. But of course, Andalusia was the part of Spain from about the 9th to the 14th centuries governed by Muslims, and there is this huge myth that Islam is a truly tolerant religion, and it isn't, and it never was. And that's not anti-Muslim, may I add. Christianity in the Middle Ages was not a tolerant religion either. But I hate lies. I have a visceral hatred for lying. And yeah, I do, I really do. And I can't stand the lies that are perpetrated today, perpetuated, and one of them being this, it's tolerant and something happened. It was never tolerant. It's Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, the house of war and the house of Islam, and that's just the way it is. Anyway, ISI published this book by a professor of Portuguese and Spanish studies at Northwestern. I got the book in the mail. Thank God ISI sent it to me. I would not have known about it as much as I try to know what's being published. And I knew this guy wrote a gutsy book. And I had him on for an hour, and I am happy to tell you, I am as happy for ISI and the author as I am for my show. The book we took photos. Alan and I took photos of, Alan is also the producer of my show as well as the founder. He says I'm co-founder, but it's not true. He founded it. And I said okay, and that was it. Anyway, we took photos of the Amazon.com page of this book. Before he came on, the book was listed at 38,700. And after the show, it was at 787. So I felt great about the show, but I felt great about my listeners that they would go and buy such a book, and of course for ISI for publishing such a book, because it's so important. So to be invited, well, I'll say something again autobiographical. I have found after 33 years of radio a very big lesson, and one day I'd like to write lessons that I've learned from doing radio for so long. The more people know about you, the more they trust you. That's true in private life, and it is true in public life. The opaque are not trusted. So I took a very big gamble from the beginning, and I just open up to people. And it has paid off. Because you know what people say to me the most when they meet me, like the TSA agent today in Phoenix? For some reason, TSA agents love my show. I have no idea why. What I say about public government employees, I can't believe they listen. But my wife is a living witness. She's with me. TSA agents in every city. Oh, in fact, wait, I don't want to lose my spread, but it was a great moment with the TSA agent. Then I'll tell you about the autobiographical thing in a moment. So this is a problem of being a public figure. You just must know this, especially if you are respected for who you are, not just what you say. So the other day in Minnesota, there was this ridiculously long line in the pre-check line. That's the line you're supposed to have a short line in. And it was ridiculous. It wrapped around, like a snake. And so I walked over to the head TSA guy and I go, "Sir, why is there only one line here for pre-check?" He goes, "Dennis Prager." And I just remember, I didn't curse, did I? I wanted to make sure that while I was annoyed, I didn't do anything that might ruin my image in this man's mind. It is a problem when you have to be very careful. You can't give dirty looks to drivers. No, there's a different world. Anyway, so the autobiographical statement is this is proof about how much I admire ISI and National Review. It is exceedingly rare that I speak on a Friday night, because I am an observant Jew, and Friday night and Saturday are sacred to me. Otherwise, I would be in an insane asylum. People ask me, how do you stay happy and sane given all the terrible news you report every day? And I answer, the Sabbath. That is my answer. I don't listen to radio, I don't watch television, I don't even read the newspaper. I leave the world for 24 hours. And it is my sanity. But on rare occasion, I think something is so morally significant that I sort of break my Sabbath, and I did in this case. Just so you'll know, that's the proof of how much I admire you and what you're doing. So I just wanted you to know that. So when they offered me earlier crab with BLT, I explained it's not check Leviticus, because we all know it's everybody's regular airplane reading Leviticus. Anyway, you got to meet Alan Estrin today, who presented Prager University. People came over, told me how good he was. I know how good he is, believe me. I think that God sent him and my wife to me, and I do call them my two spouses. Alan has a spouse of the opposite sex as well, but that is how close we are, and he is a gift beyond description. So you had a chance to meet him and see what we're doing. Now, I was asked to speak. I love these large topics. I was not asked to speak on the myth of Andalusian Islamic tolerance. I was asked to speak on the future of the Western world. But, and then they said, can you do that in about 8 minutes? No, not an issue. I'm used to speaking between commercial breaks. But no, they didn't say the 8 minutes, but that's fine with me. It's a very important topic. So let me answer you. I've thought about this my whole life, and let me give you some of my answers. There were two sections here. First is to understand, which is not taught today at all. Our universities have deteriorated terribly. It's part of the reason for pessimism over the West. Incidentally, I have a theory that there were two major sea changes in American life that produced a sort of moral and intellectual deterioration or an enfeeblement of the American mind. And they both took place after World War II. One is television, which did profoundly enfeeble American culture. If there were no television, we would be much better off. And people say, well, isn't there anything good on TV? It's like when people will call my show and say, Dennis, you really attack the left a lot. Didn't the left do anything good? And I honestly answer them, there is nothing in history that has not done any good. It doesn't exist. The question is meaningless. It's like asking, well, this guy, it's true, he raped 3 girls and 2 boys, and murdered 4 of the 5, but there's a good side to everybody. Well, it doesn't mean anything. We all have moral bank accounts, and if they're deeply in the red, they're deeply in the red. The moral bank account of television is bankruptcy. And there was one other development, widespread college attendance. It has enfeebled the American mind just as much, but much more dangerously, because people who watch TV don't assume they are brilliant. But people who get a PhD do think they're brilliant, and they're not. In fact, I have an ongoing policy on my show. When someone calls and says something particularly stupid, I then say, I'm just curious, what graduate school did you attend? And then they will say, people fall in, it's beautiful. I feel like a straight man, it works out beautifully. And then they say, well, how do you know I went to graduate school? And I said, well, it's not meant to insult you, because I never insult callers or guests. But you had to go to graduate school to say something that stupid. And I mean that, by the way. You have to have gone to college to believe men and women are basically the same. My grandmother, who didn't graduate elementary school, understood men and women better than most PhDs in women's studies. I mean that literally. I do not mean that hyperbolically. They don't understand anything. If you get a PhD in the liberal arts, I assume you're foolish. There are exceptions. Of course there are. I'm not foolish. But they are exceptions. And it's like getting a PhD in howdy doody. All right? But nobody who gets a PhD in howdy doody thinks they're brilliant. But if you get one from college or from university, you do think that. These two developments have been horrific. Widespread college attendance, because I remember, I'll never forget, when I was my late teens, early 20s, so I guess I was already at college, I was having a meal at my parents' house, and there was another couple there with their child, something to that effect. Anyway, the child was yelling at the parents, and I don't mean disrespectfully, but was, so to speak, yelling at the parents. Look, Dad, you just don't understand. You didn't go to college. The father was entirely right about what he was saying, but he was intimidated because his son went to college. And so his son, who had been already indoctrinated into the very opposite values of his father, never have so many people paid so much money to have their children become alienated from their values. This has never occurred in the history of mankind until modern American society. I would say Western European, but the Western Europeans are not traditional, so they don't feel that their kids are being alienated from their values. They're just being reinforced. These two developments have been horrific. We truly do believe our intent when we give reading material, and by the way, Jonah has done some work for PragerU as well. There's a lot of symbiosis here. We intend to provide reading lists. And so eventually, and not in the far distant future, I will be able to say, under penalty of perjury, that you will learn more about life going to Prager University for free than going to Stanford University for $50,000. And by the way, I only say Stanford because we just got a letter from a graduate of Stanford who said that to us. I learned more in Prager University than in 4 years at Stanford. That's if you care about wisdom. Obviously, you're not going to learn more math or physics or botany at Prager University. I think you would learn more if you read National Review's website than if you went to college. It's not just us. Why that's happened is a subject, part of the reason for pessimism for the Western world. So, and I want to say a word about pessimism. I am pessimistic. I am also the happiest pessimist you will ever meet. So how is it possible to be happy and pessimistic? Now, you may or may not know, I've devoted a great deal of time to the subject of happiness. I wrote a book that has sold very well, Happiness is a Serious Problem. It's touched a lot of lives, apparently, and my happiness hour on my radio show, which I have never canceled. It's the second hour on Friday. I broadcast my happiness hour the week of 9/11. That was a Tuesday, if I recall correctly, and on Friday I still did my happiness hour, and I made the point. The whole point of a happiness hour is how can you be happy in light of how much suffering there is. To have canceled the happiness hour would have given in. Then I have nothing to say. The whole point, that's why I titled my book, Happiness is a Serious Problem. HarperCollins hated the title. They said it was a downer. And I'll never forget my discussion with them. I said, I just want to know, is it true? Yeah, of course it's a serious problem. Thank you. That's the title. And that remained the title. But I had to fight for it because it was a downer. But it's true. Anyway, it's true because the world is in terrible shape. It's always been in terrible shape, except there was reason for optimism. And now there isn't much reason for optimism because the good guys are losing. We're losing the most important country for goodness ever invented, the United States of America. And Western Europe is essentially lost, but it's been lost essentially since World War I. It gave up on itself after World War I. America gave up on itself, I guess, after college and the Vietnam War. And we're just trailing Europe by about a generation. But most intellectuals think Western Europe is a great place. So here is my argument. Virtually everything good in the human species has come from Western civilization. Incidentally, just for the record, I am well aware of a lot of evil that has taken place in Western civilization. I wrote a book, which is now in its third edition with Simon & Schuster, coming out its third edition, I think next week or last week, don't recall. Why the Jews, the reason for anti-Semitism. I know how Jews have been treated in Western civilization. I wrote a book on it, as it happens. So I am not oblivious to the amount of evil that has taken place in the West. However, evil is ubiquitous. Evil is universal. The only question mature people, which disqualifies most professors, and I don't mean that as a throwaway line, it does disqualify them. They stay in that profession because colleges are kindergartens. The only difference between kindergarten and college is the age of the kinder. That is the biggest single difference. And so mature people don't ask, well, or say, look at all the evil. They say, why is there any good? Good is the outlier, not evil. Slavery was universal. Child sacrifice was universal. Human sacrifice generally was universal. Poverty was universal. So the only mature question is, why did any place abolish human sacrifice? Why did any place abolish slavery? Why did any place create wealth? That's what you should ask, but nobody asks that. It is a non-college asked question. Evil is universal, so let's discount it. The question is, why is there good? Not why is there evil is the norm. That is why I am convinced the question that I ask to find out if I'm speaking to a fool, even intelligent and kind, you can be intelligent, kind, and foolish, just for the record, is I ask them if they believe people are basically good. If they do, and some of you might, and I don't mean to offend you, in that regard, you are a fool. And why people choose to believe something so patently absurd is beyond me. I am very involved, among other things, in Jewish life, to the extent that Jews tolerate me being a conservative. But it's hard not to, because I wrote a very, very widely used introduction to Judaism, and I've spoken at 1,000 synagogues, so it's not 1,000, 800. And so it's hard to ignore me in Jewish life. I'm a columnist for the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles, which has a big presence on the internet. And I wrote a column when I started as a columnist, why do Jews think people are basically good? Which is part of the reason Jews are on the left. Because if you think people are basically good, you tend to go leftward. And there are many answers to that, but the amount of hate mail that column received was fascinating. They hated me for writing people are not basically good. This is a generation after Auschwitz. Jews still believe that people are basically good, as do liberals generally. So we're not. And that's why good needs to be studied and analyzed, not evil. For every book on evil, or let's put it this way, for every 1,000 books studying human evil, there might be one, maybe one, I doubt it. I don't think the ratio is even 1 to 1,000, probably 1 to 50,000 books on why people are good. I have read every book I know of on rescuers of Jews in the Holocaust. I am sure there are under 20. There are thousands of books about Nazi evil. And there might be 20 books on analyzing the people who saved Jews. That to me is a much bigger riddle. I understand why people torture, murder, go with the herd. Why do people stand up to the herd is an infinitely more important question, it would strike me. So Western civilization had evils like every other civilization, every other, but it had unique good. Human rights, Western concept, universal human rights. Western, uniquely Western. These are not just Western, they're uniquely. Human equality, all people are equal, Western. Democracy, Western. Abolition of slavery, Western. The greatest music, the greatest art, the greatest architecture, Western. Now, people will say, oh, please, that is so dismissive of other music, art, and architecture. But it isn't. It's a statement that those people believe. Ask Japanese, what's the greatest music ever written? They'll say Bach. I'm very involved in classical music, so that's the art that I will use. I conduct orchestras in Southern California. This is a very serious pursuit of mine in my life. So I will tell you the greatest edition of the Bach cantatas, the greatest, it is generally universally acknowledged, was done by a man named Suzuki, and he just finished his 300th CD just the last year. Suzuki, and they're all Japanese singers. The greatest interpreters of Bach. I'll never forget when I was in Tokyo in my 20s, I went to hear Beethoven's Ninth Tokyo Symphony Orchestra. And I was there, I was traveling alone, which is the way I traveled prior to getting married. It's a great way to travel. You really are forced to interact with people. Anyway, I went to the guy, and obviously I don't speak Japanese. He spoke a little English. Said, any tickets? He said, how many? I said, one. And he looks at me, we have one, you are very lucky. And I'll never forget that, how lucky I was to get the last seat for Beethoven's Ninth. And the people went crazy. They're crazy about Beethoven. None of them argue that Japanese classical music is as good as Western classical music. It's no insult. I mean, would I argue Jewish music is as good as Western music? I mean, I'd have to be deaf to make such an argument. But you can't say this at any university. There is no better. There is no better. Wealth. Only the West produced wealth. Modern science came from the West. A universal God came from the West. Basically, everything good came from the West. There were horrible people in the West. There were beautiful people in the East and in the South. But that's a fact. And we are dismissing Western culture despite everything that I just listed, all the good stuff. It comes from the West. Now, here is where I am sort of lonely. And it was the subject of my last column, which got a good play in National Review and elsewhere, because I'm always curious to see how many shares and how many comments, and it's very interesting. I wrote an open letter, as it were, to my fellow conservatives who are secular. And I said, I don't care if you're secular or religious, but I do care if you dismiss the indispensable significance of God and Judeo-Christian religions to America's possible survival. And there are many secular conservatives, and they are terrific. I remember, I won't say his name. The only thing you'll know about him is it is a he. This happened many years ago, about 25 years ago, at a plush apartment in Manhattan. I had dinner at these people who had one of the leading, he's a name every one of you will know. Don't try to guess, it's a silly game. But it's just a very, very important person. I'm sure he wouldn't even care he's now deceased. I'm sure he wouldn't even care if I said it, because I'm not saying anything bad, but I'm very, very serious about people's dignity. So it's not important, but he's huge. He made a great impact, morally great impact on the country. But I was a little stunned when we had a debate. We got into, I don't know how it happened. Maybe he said, so what do you talk about or write about? I don't remember how it happened. And we got into a debate about whether or not you could have objective good and evil if there's no God. And every atheist, I debated this at Oxford, and the atheist I debated, the first thing he said was, Mr. Prager is right. If there is no God, there is no objective good and evil. It's all subjective. And I remember, it's in print, this debate, and I said, I just want to say it is such a joy and honor to debate an intellectually honest person with whom I differ. And I meant it sincerely. Virtually every atheist philosopher acknowledges, if there's no God, that ethics are subjective. What you think is good for you. What I think is good for me. But he didn't admit that. He said, you don't need God to have objective good and evil. And I thought, this is one of the most important conservatives in America, and he's arguing that? That was my first realization that a lot of secular conservatives don't understand how significant the God issue is. I don't care if they believe. I care if they understand how important God is. I don't care if you're an atheist. It's your business. I care if you understand that the founders were not idiots and understood that America cannot survive godlessness. Just as Western Europe cannot survive godlessness. It is a dead place. It is soulless. I have been to, well, how many are there? 40, 50 European countries. I've been to every one except 4, and I'm visiting those 4 this year. By the way, this is my one brag. The only time I ever brag is I've been to 115 countries. I just have to say that. It is irrelevant to any point I am about to make, but I am so proud of it, I just have to get it into every speech. That's it, and it's that subject. And yes, I did, by the way, people say, because they always say, Mr. Prager, in the bio it says he's lectured on 7 continents. What, you lectured in Antarctica? Well, I did, but I have to say, just for the record, I was on a ship in which I lectured right off Antarctica. But in order to say on Antarctica, I did go out, and there is a picture on my website of me speaking to about 150 penguins. And it's one of the great moments. I spoke to them about ethical monotheism, and they were as attentive as some of my other audiences have been, actually, now that I think of it. So I don't care, again, if you're atheist, but the founders knew. Let me just read to you one perfect example. John Adams, okay? John Adams. Because we have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. By the way, see, they understood people are not basically good. That's the point. Human passions unbridled. They were afraid of human passions. Something's got to control human passions. Either the government will, or what will? Answer, religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. A secular conservative who does not understand that differs with the founders, every single one of whom spoke of the critical nature of God and religion and Bible. Not all were Orthodox Christians, that is true. Not all believed in the Trinity. All believed, however, in this God. Even Jefferson and Franklin designed, or had someone design the Great Seal of the United States. You know what it was? The Jews leaving Egypt. 2 guys who were considered quote-unquote deists. Incidentally, reading Franklin's autobiography, I realized, and I remember when I read this to my wife, Franklin and I have identical theologies. Identical. And to call him a deist is an absurdity. He believed that God judges every human being. That's not a deist. A deist is God created the world and then checked out. Not one of the founders believed that. As a result of the rejection of the Judeo-Christian religions that made the West what they are, and this is the West that is uniquely good, or has produced unique amounts of goodness, what happened when Judeo-Christian religion died? Specifically Christianity in Europe, you got Nazism and communism. People don't stop believing in religions when God-based religion dies. They just develop other religions. We have more religions in the United States that are secular than we have that are religious. Feminism, environmentalism, egalitarianism, humanism, I mean, it's just, the isms are there. Because people, as Chesterton said, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. That's exactly what has happened. What are some of the consequences of this godlessness, religion-free, secular America and West? The demise of marriage, the end of the will to fight evil, moral confusion, no personal borders. I'll explain all of these in a moment. People don't even have children. The will to survive is dead. Every time I get a call from a young person who mentions that they have children, I say, I assume you're religious, is that correct? Oh yeah, what are you? One of 4 things: Catholic, Mormon, evangelical, Orthodox Jew. They're the ones who are having children, and they're the ones who are getting married earlier, and that's it. To meet a secular 28-year-old or 35-year-old with 5 children, I have not met one. I'm sure such a person exists, and I'm sure a few were mistakes. But deliberately to have 5 or more children If you're secular, I don't know any such human being. Religious people believe it's worth preserving the society and having more children. So demise of marriage, you have to understand something. Marriage and children are values. We don't realize that. There was a song which many of you know because of a later adaptation of the song for a television series, Love and Marriage Go Together Like a Horse and Carriage. That's what people believed in the 1950s, 40s, 30s, 20s, 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, 16th century, and as long as there were horses and carriages. But it's not true. Love and marriage go together if you affirm a religious outlook. Not if you're secular. They don't go together at all. It's all a matter of values, and if you don't have those values, there's no case to be made. There is no secular case for anything. Here's an example. What's the secular case against public nudity? It's not a riddle. There is none. I assume all of you oppose public nudity. I mean, in the streets. I don't care. I'm not talking about a private beach, right? You don't have a single secular argument. San Francisco had this debate. City Council actually debated whether or not to drop bans on public nudity. This happened 2 years ago. And they lost. The dropping of the bans lost by one vote. I think it was 8-7. San Francisco City Council. So in other words, within a year or two, they will drop the ban and public nudity will be allowed in San Francisco. Do you know what the argument was? Because I was shocked. 8 people voted to keep laws against public nudity in San Francisco, the quintessentially secular place. And the argument they gave was, it isn't sanitary. That's it. That was the argument. It's not sanitary. So of course there's a response. Naked people will have to carry a towel, and when they sit on a park bench, they will have to sit on the towel. And I think that ends the problem of the sanitary argument. The only argument against public nudity is that human beings are created in God's image and have sanctity. Animals are naked, humans are clothed. The first thing God does in Genesis, the first thing God does for humanity after humanity leaves the Garden of Eden or begins to leave by eating of the tree of knowledge is make them clothing. But it's a book nobody reads anymore. Nobody reads the Bible, except for a handful of religious Americans. The most widely read book in American history, I truly do believe, and I intend, by the way, to prove this. I'm going to go to some of these colleges. I was just at Stanford, but I didn't get a chance to ask this. But I intend to spend a few days at some prestigious colleges, and I don't give a damn if a college is prestigious. It means nothing to me, but it will mean more to the people to find this out. For example, what if more than half of Harvard seniors cannot identify Cain and Abel correctly? And I would bet that more than half cannot. That's Cain and Abel, folks. Okay? This is not difficult stuff. This was, every third grader in America knew this 100 years ago, who Cain and Abel were. The ignorance is profound. Guatemalan lesbian poets are well known at Harvard. But Genesis, zilch. So it's all, the consequences of secularism is the most important subject of all, and very few people are addressing it. The end of the will to fight evil. Look at Europe. Remember how much they demonstrated against Pershings in Europe when Ronald Reagan wanted to put them in? Do you remember how Ronald Reagan was excoriated by the secular left with regard to calling the Soviet Union an evil empire? The will to fight evil dies in the Western world when God dies. Another one of the marriage dies, children die, having children dies. Moral confusion, the moral confusion, well, this I knew from when I first started speaking in my early 20s. And it is not changed. Example, most American students, David Brooks wrote about this in the New York Times. I was